Dropped a quarter out of my pocketbook that landed by my foot only to hear behind me, "Go get it." What happened next destroyed a woman's reputation in front of an entire store, and honestly, she deserved every bit of it. My name is Rebecca, I'm 28, and I work as a graphic designer in Portland, Oregon. I've always been the type of person who minds my own business, keeps my head down, and tries to avoid confrontation at all costs. My grandmother Phyllis always told me, "Honey, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar," and I lived by those words religiously. Maybe too religiously, as I would soon discover. Growing up in a small town in rural Oregon, I was raised by my grandmother after my parents died in a car accident when I was 7. Phyllis was everything to me: mother, father, best friend, and moral compass all rolled into one amazing woman. She taught me that politeness was a virtue, that kindness was strength, and that you should always give people the benefit of the doubt. She worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat: cleaning houses during the day, waitressing at the local diner in the evenings, and doing bookkeeping for small businesses on weekends. Despite being exhausted most of the time, she never once raised her voice at me or showed anything but patience and love. Phyllis had this way of handling difficult people that I always admired. When Mrs. Henderson from down the street would complain about our lawn not being perfect, Phyllis would just smile and say, "I'll see what I can do about that." When the landlord tried to raise our rent illegally, she'd sit him down with sweet tea and somehow convince him to not only keep it the same but to fix the leaky roof he'd been ignoring for months. She had this magical ability to diffuse any situation with grace and charm. I tried my whole life to be like her. In high school, when Jessica Morrison spread rumors about me dating her boyfriend, which was completely untrue, I didn't fight back or defend myself. I just took it and hoped it would blow over. When my college roommate stole my design project and presented it as her own, I let it slide rather than cause drama. When my first boss at the design firm took credit for my work in front of the entire board, I stayed quiet and told myself that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. This pattern followed me into my adult life. I was the friend who always said yes to covering shifts, the girlfriend who never complained when dates got canceled last minute, the employee who worked overtime without compensation because I didn't want to seem difficult. My friends used to joke that I was too nice for my own good, but I genuinely believed that being accommodating and avoiding conflict was the right way to live. That belief was about to be seriously challenged on a cold Tuesday afternoon in December 2015. Like half of America, I was caught up in the Star Wars fever that was sweeping the nation. The Force Awakens was about to hit theaters, and the hype was absolutely unreal. Social media was buzzing with theories, movie theaters were selling out weeks in advance, and merchandise was flying off the shelves faster than stores could stock it. Our office had decided to throw a Star Wars-themed movie night the weekend after opening night, complete with costumes, themed snacks, and a full marathon of the original trilogy before heading out to see the new film. I had volunteered to handle the themed treats, partly because I genuinely enjoyed baking and partly because I wanted to impress my coworkers. I'd been at the design firm for about 2 years, and while I got along well with everyone, I still felt like I was trying to prove myself. My boss, Amanda, was this incredibly talented woman who seemed to excel at everything she touched, and I desperately wanted her approval. The other designers were all so creative and confident, and I often felt like the awkward little sister tagging along with the cool kids. So when the opportunity arose to contribute something special to our movie night, I jumped at the chance. I spent hours researching ideas online, scrolling through Pinterest boards and YouTube tutorials until I found the perfect concept: handmade chocolates shaped like iconic Star Wars elements. I'm talking Death Star truffles with dark chocolate shells and salted caramel centers, lightsaber candy bars in different flavors for Jedi and Sith, Millennium Falcon-shaped white chocolate pieces, and even tiny chocolate Darth Vader helmets. The more I planned, the more excited I got. This was going to be amazing. But to pull off this ambitious chocolate project, I needed professional quality molds. The cheap plastic ones from the grocery store weren't going to cut it. I needed the real deal, silicone molds that would give clean lines, sharp details, and easy release. That's what brought me to Michael's craft store that Tuesday afternoon. I remember the drive there vividly. It was one of those crisp December days where the air is so cold it almost hurts to breathe, but the sun is shining bright enough to make everything look like it's been dusted with diamonds. Christmas music was playing on the radio, and I was in such a good mood that I actually sang along to Jingle Bell Rock at a red light, probably embarrassing myself in front of the car next to me. The Michael's parking lot was busier than I'd expected. I had to circle around twice before finding a spot near the back, which meant I needed quarters for the parking meter. I grabbed a handful of change from my cup holder and stuffed it into my pocket, making a mental note to feed the meter before I got too caught up shopping. Walking into the store felt like entering a winter wonderland. They had their full Christmas display up, towering trees covered in ornaments, garland draped from every available surface, and enough twinkling lights to power a small city. The holiday music playing overhead mixed with the chatter of other shoppers and the occasional announcement over the intercom created this warm, festive atmosphere that made me smile despite the cold. I grabbed a shopping cart and headed straight for the baking section, which was tucked away in the back corner of the store. The aisle was packed with everything a baking enthusiast could dream of: professional-grade mixers, specialty pans, decorating tools, and most importantly, an entire wall of chocolate and candy molds. It was like Christmas morning for someone planning a themed party. I spent a good 20 minutes examining different mold options, comparing sizes, reading reviews on my phone, and trying to calculate exactly how many chocolates I'd need to make. The Wilton brand molds were definitely the best quality, but they were also the most expensive. I found myself doing mental math, trying to figure out if the upgrade was worth it or if I should stick to my budget and go with the slightly cheaper alternatives. That's when I decided I needed to write down some notes. I wanted to record the aisle numbers where I found the best products, compare prices, and make a shopping list for any additional supplies I might need. I knew I had a pen somewhere in my purse. I always carried one because you never knew when inspiration might strike and you'd need to sketch out a design idea. My grandmother had always called her purse a pocketbook, a term that apparently went out of style sometime in the 1960s but that I'd adopted anyway. It was one of those little habits that connected me to her memory. Even though she'd been gone for 5 years, I still used her old-fashioned terms for things. It made me feel close to her, like she was still there giving me advice and watching over me. I set my purse on the floor of my shopping cart and started digging through it, looking for that elusive pen. If you've ever seen the inside of a woman's purse, you know it's basically a black hole where small objects go to disappear forever. I had my wallet, keys, lip balm, phone charger, a packet of tissues, breath mints, hand sanitizer, sunglasses, at least 3 different tubes of lip gloss, a small bottle of ibuprofen, and what felt like 17 receipts from various purchases I'd made over the past month. But no pen. I was getting a little frustrated, shifting things around and checking every pocket and compartment, when I felt something slip out of my coat pocket. It was subtle, just a tiny metallic sound and the briefest sensation of something brushing against my leg. I looked down and saw one of my parking meter quarters rolling across the linoleum floor before coming to rest right next to my left foot. For a split second, I felt that little spike of annoyance you get when you drop something. Not anger, just mild irritation at my own clumsiness. I started to bend down to pick it up, already thinking about how I'd need to be more careful with my change, when I heard a voice behind me that made my blood run cold. "Go get it." The voice was sharp, commanding, with an accent I couldn't immediately place. It definitely wasn't directed at me, but something about the tone made me freeze. I straightened up and turned around, expecting to see a parent talking to their child about picking up a toy or maybe someone directing their spouse to grab something they dropped. What I saw instead was something that still gives me chills when I think about it. Standing about 10 feet away was a woman who looked to be in her early 40s, impeccably dressed in what was obviously an expensive wool coat, designer handbag, and boots that probably cost more than I made in a week. Her dark brown hair was styled in one of those perfect blowouts that only comes from a high-end salon, and her makeup was flawless. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread about successful businesswomen. But it wasn't her appearance that shocked me, it was the way she was looking at a little boy who couldn't have been more than 9 years old. The kid was small for his age, with sandy brown hair and wide eyes that held an expression I'll never forget. It wasn't the typical look of a child who'd been asked to help with something. It was pure, immediate obedience mixed with what I can only describe as fear. Not the healthy fear of disappointing a parent, but something deeper and more troubling. The woman wasn't looking at my quarter on the floor. She was staring directly at her son with an intensity that made me uncomfortable even as a bystander. When she said, "Go get it," again, more forcefully this time, the little boy didn't hesitate. He didn't ask what she was talking about, didn't look around to see what he was supposed to get, didn't show any of the normal confusion you'd expect from a child given a vague command. Instead, he immediately darted forward, moving with the kind of precise urgency you might see from a soldier following orders. He snatched my quarter from the floor where it had fallen and ran back to his mother's side like he'd just completed some kind of military mission. The whole thing couldn't have taken more than 5 seconds, but it felt like watching something happen in slow motion. I stood there completely stunned, trying to process what had just occurred. Did this woman seriously just tell her child to take my money? It was only 25 cents, but it was 25 cents. More than that, it was the principle of the thing. You don't just take things that belong to other people, and you certainly don't teach your children to do it. The logical part of my brain was trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she thought the quarter was just random change someone had dropped earlier. Maybe she didn't realize it had fallen from my pocket. Maybe this was all just a big misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a polite explanation. But the way she'd looked at that little boy, the way he'd responded with such immediate and fearful obedience, told me this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. I felt my heart start to pound the way it always did when I sensed conflict coming. Every instinct I had was telling me to just let it go, to write off the quarter as the cost of avoiding confrontation. After all, what was 25 cents in the grand scheme of things? I made decent money at the design firm, I wasn't struggling to pay bills, and causing a scene over pocket change seemed petty and small. But something else was happening inside me, something I'd never experienced before. There was this voice in my head, not my grandmother's gentle, peacekeeping voice that I was used to hearing, but something fiercer and more insistent. It was telling me that this wasn't about the money. It was about right and wrong. It was about not allowing someone to steal from me and then pretend it hadn't happened. It was about not being a doormat. I took a deep breath, the way my grandmother had taught me to do when I was nervous, and approached the woman and her son. My voice came out quieter than I'd intended, barely above a whisper. "Excuse me," I said, "could you please have your son give me back my quarter?" It fell from my purse. The woman turned to look at me, and the expression on her face was like nothing I'd ever encountered before. It wasn't surprise or embarrassment or even defensiveness. It was pure, undiluted disdain. She looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found stuck to the bottom of her expensive boot, something that needed to be scraped off and discarded. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice dripping with fake innocence that was so obviously artificial it was almost insulting. "My son didn't take anything from you." I felt my face get hot, the way it always did when I was embarrassed or upset. Was she seriously going to lie to my face when we both knew exactly what had just happened? When I had literally watched her tell her son to take my money. "Ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and polite despite the anger building in my chest, "I saw him pick up my quarter. You told him to get it. Could you please just ask him to give it back?" The woman crossed her arms and looked me up and down like she was sizing up an opponent in some kind of battle I hadn't realized I'd entered. Her eyes were cold and calculating, and I got the distinct impression that this wasn't the first time she'd been in a situation like this. "You're mistaken," she said with the kind of confidence that people use when they're lying but don't expect to be challenged. "My son found that quarter on the ground. Finders keepers. Finders keepers." She actually said finders keepers, like we were children arguing over a toy on a playground. I couldn't believe this was really happening. A grown woman, probably a mother with responsibilities and a job and a mortgage, was standing in the middle of Michael's craft store insisting that her son had the right to keep money he'd stolen from me because of a playground rule that stops being relevant sometime around age 6. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could get the words out, I heard another voice join the conversation. "Actually, I saw the whole thing." I turned to see an older woman, probably in her 60s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a shopping cart full of colorful yarn. She was small and slightly hunched, the kind of grandmotherly figure you'd expect to find knitting in a rocking chair or baking cookies for the neighborhood kids. But her voice was strong and clear, and she was looking directly at the quarter thief with an expression of polite but firm disapproval. "I watched this young lady's quarter fall from her purse," she continued, stepping closer to us, "and I heard you tell your boy to go get it. That's her money, and you know it." I could have kissed this stranger. Finally, someone willing to speak up for what was right. Someone who had witnessed the theft and was brave enough to say something about it. I felt a rush of gratitude toward this woman who didn't even know me but was willing to get involved in what could easily become an unpleasant confrontation. But instead of backing down or apologizing like any reasonable person would do when caught in a lie, the woman with my quarter doubled down. She looked at both of us with a smug expression that made my skin crawl, like she was enjoying the challenge of maintaining her obviously false story. "You're both seeing things," she said with the kind of casual confidence that suggested she'd talked her way out of similar situations before. "My son found that quarter fair and square. It was just sitting there on the ground." That's when she did something that made my jaw drop. She turned to her son, who had been standing silently beside her clutching my quarter in his small fist, and said loud enough for everyone in the aisle to hear, "Go use your quarter to buy some candy from the machines up front, sweetie. You earned it. You earned it." Those 3 words hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't just stealing from me anymore, she was rewarding her child for stealing from me. She was teaching him that taking other people's money was not only acceptable but praiseworthy, something that deserved a treat as a reward. The little boy looked uncomfortable for the first time since this whole thing started. He glanced between his mother and me with obvious uncertainty, like some part of him knew this wasn't right, but he was too afraid of his mother to say anything. When she gave him a little push toward the front of the store, though, he obediently walked away, still clutching my quarter in his hand. I watched him go, this little boy who should have been learning about honesty and respect and treating others the way you want to be treated, and I felt something inside me break. Not just sadness or frustration, but something deeper. It was like watching someone poison a child's soul in real time. I was shaking now, not from fear but from pure, righteous anger. 25 cents wasn't going to break my bank, but the audacity of this woman was beyond anything I'd ever experienced in my 28 years of life. She wasn't just stealing from me, she was corrupting her own child, teaching him that might makes right and that other people's property was fair game if you could get away with taking it. I cannot believe you, I said, my voice getting stronger as the anger overtook my natural tendency to avoid conflict. You're literally teaching your child to steal. The woman stepped closer to me, invading my personal space in a way that felt deliberately threatening. She was taller than me by several inches, and she used that height advantage to loom over me like she was trying to intimidate me into backing down. Watch your mouth, she hissed, her fake pleasant demeanor finally dropping to reveal the ugly person underneath. You don't know what you're talking about. That's when the older woman with the yarn cart spoke up again, and I could hear the steel in her voice despite her gentle appearance. Honey, I saw everything clear as day. This isn't right, and you know it. That little girl dropped her quarter, and you told your boy to take it. There's no excuse for that kind of behavior, especially in front of your child. The woman whirled around to face my unexpected ally, and I could see her face getting red with anger at being challenged by multiple people. Mind your own business, old lady, she snapped. This doesn't concern you. The older woman didn't flinch. If anything, she seemed to grow taller as she straightened her shoulders and looked the thief directly in the eye. When I see an adult teaching a child to steal, it becomes my business. I've got 4 grandchildren of my own, and if I ever caught one of them acting like you're acting right now, they'd be in for the talking to of their lives. I was amazed by this stranger's courage. Here was this small, elderly woman facing down someone half her age and twice her size, and she wasn't backing down an inch. She was standing up for what was right even though it would have been so much easier to just mind her own business and continue shopping. But the quarter thief wasn't done yet. She looked around the aisle, maybe checking to see if anyone else was watching, then turned back to face both of us. What she did next shocked everyone within a 20-foot radius and probably violated several store policies. She raised her right hand and gave both of us the middle finger. Right there in the middle of Michael's, with families and children shopping all around us, this grown woman threw up an obscene gesture like she was a teenager having a tantrum. The older woman gasped audibly. Well, I felt tears of frustration building up behind my eyes. This was exactly why I hated confrontation. It never solved anything, it just made people nastier and more aggressive. All I'd wanted was my quarter back, and now I was being cursed at and threatened by a stranger in a craft store while her child learned that this was how adults handled disagreements. But then I heard footsteps approaching quickly from behind me, and a voice that sounded like salvation itself. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me. I turned to see a Michael's employee approaching us with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he'd been watching this whole interaction unfold. He was a young guy, probably in his early 20s, with sandy brown hair and a name tag that read Dylan, assistant manager. Despite his youth, he carried himself with authority and looked like he meant business. What? The woman snapped, clearly irritated at being interrupted in the middle of her public display of rudeness. I saw everything that just happened, Dylan said, his voice calm but firm. I watched you instruct your son to take this customer's quarter, I heard you lie about it repeatedly, and I just witnessed you make an obscene gesture at 2 of our customers. That behavior is completely unacceptable in our store. The woman's face went through about 5 different shades of red as she realized that her little performance had been observed by store management. For the first time since this whole thing started, she looked genuinely worried. You can't prove anything, she said, but her voice had lost most of its earlier confidence. She was no longer the intimidating figure who had been towering over me just moments before. Now she just looked like what she was, a woman who had been caught behaving badly and was scrambling to avoid the consequences. Actually, I can prove everything, Dylan replied matter-of-factly. We have security cameras throughout the store, and I was standing right over there when the whole thing started. But more importantly, I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I just need you to leave. He reached for the shopping cart she'd been pushing, which I now noticed was absolutely loaded with craft supplies. There were bags of decorative paper, ribbon, glue, markers, paint sets, fabric, and what looked like enough party decorations to throw a major celebration. She'd clearly been planning a big purchase. "What are you doing?" she demanded, grabbing for the cart handle as Dylan took control of it. "I'm returning all of these items to the shelves," Dylan said with the kind of practiced calm that suggested he'd dealt with difficult customers before. "You won't be making any purchases today." "But I was going to pay for all of this," she protested, and for the first time, I heard genuine panic in her voice. "I need these things. I'm planning my daughter's birthday party." Dylan shook his head firmly. "Not here, you're not. I'm asking you to leave the store. If you refuse, I'll have to call security and potentially the police." I looked around and realized that our little drama had attracted quite an audience. Other customers had stopped their shopping to watch what was happening, and several people were holding up their phones, probably recording the whole thing. A few employees had gathered nearby, clearly ready to back up Dylan if the situation escalated further. The woman looked around wildly, maybe hoping for support from other customers or looking for an escape route that would let her salvage some dignity from this situation. But everyone was staring at her with expressions ranging from disgust to amusement. She had become the villain in her own story, and there was no way to spin what had happened into anything that made her look good. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, her voice echoing through the store. "It was just a quarter. A stupid quarter." "It wasn't about the quarter," Dylan said, and I wanted to hug him for understanding what so many people missed about situations like this. "It was about your behavior. The lying, the stealing, the disrespect to other customers, the inappropriate gestures. That's not who we want in our store, regardless of how much you might spend." The woman stood there for a moment, clearly torn between continuing to argue and cutting her losses. She looked from Dylan to me to the older woman to the growing crowd of spectators, and I could see the exact moment when she realized that she wasn't going to win this fight. "Fine," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "This place is overpriced anyway. I can get better stuff at Hobby Lobby." She turned and stormed toward the front of the store, her expensive heels clicking angrily on the linoleum floor. I watched her collect her son from the candy machines, yanking him by the arm hard enough to make him stumble and nearly drop the handful of candy he'd apparently bought with my quarter. As they headed for the exit, I could hear her muttering under her breath in what sounded like another language, probably cursing all of us in words that would have gotten her kicked out even faster if anyone had understood them. The older woman with the yarn cart came over to me and patted my arm gently with a weathered hand that felt warm and comforting. "Are you okay, dear?" she asked, her voice full of genuine concern. I nodded, still processing everything that had just happened. "Thank you so much for speaking up. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there to back me up." She smiled warmly, and I could see the kindness that had made her willing to get involved in a stranger's problem. "My name is Margaret, and I've got 4 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. If I ever caught one of them acting like that woman, they'd be grounded until they were 30. That woman should be ashamed of herself, treating people that way and teaching her child such terrible lessons." Dylan approached us, pushing the abandoned cart full of craft supplies and party decorations. "I'm really sorry you had to deal with that," he said sincerely. "Some people just have no shame. Are you going to be okay to continue shopping, or would you like me to have someone walk with you to your car?" "I'm fine," I assured him, though I was still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "What's going to happen to all that stuff?" I asked, gesturing to the overflowing cart. Dylan shrugged. "I'll put it all back where it belongs. It's part of the job, unfortunately. Though I have to say, in 4 years of working here, 3 of them as assistant manager, I've never had to kick someone out for stealing a quarter and then giving customers the finger." Margaret laughed, a sound like wind chimes that somehow made the whole situation seem less heavy. "Well, there's a first time for everything, I suppose. Though I hope it's the last time you have to deal with something like that." We all stood there for a moment, the absurdity of the situation starting to sink in. This woman had just lost probably $80 or $90 worth of purchases over 25 cents and her own stubborn pride. She'd embarrassed herself in front of dozens of people, traumatized her child, and gotten herself banned from the store, all because she couldn't admit she was wrong and return a quarter that didn't belong to her. "The crazy thing is," I said, shaking my head in amazement, "if she had just apologized when I first asked and had her son give me back the quarter, this whole thing would have been over in 30 seconds. Instead, she chose to lie about it and escalate the situation." Dylan nodded knowingly. "Some people would rather fight than admit they made a mistake. It's like they think being wrong about something small makes them weak, so they double down and make everything worse. Pride goeth before a fall," Margaret added wisely. "That's what my mother used to say, and she was right more often than not." I thanked both Dylan and Margaret again, exchanging contact information with Margaret because she seemed like the kind of person I'd like to have as a friend. Then I continued with my shopping, though I found it hard to focus on chocolate molds after everything that had just happened. I eventually found the perfect Star Wars themed molds, picked up some gold luster dust to make the chocolates look extra fancy, and even grabbed a few additional supplies for future projects. As I was checking out at the front of the store, the cashier, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, mentioned that she'd heard about the quarter incident from Dylan. "That lady comes in here sometimes," she said quietly as she scanned my items. "She's always rude to the staff, always complaining about something or demanding discounts she's not entitled to. Honestly, I'm glad Dylan finally had a reason to ban her." "She's banned?" I asked, surprised that the consequences were that serious. "Oh yes. Dylan has the authority to refuse service to anyone who's disruptive, disrespectful, or makes other customers uncomfortable. Once you're banned from our store, that's it. Corporate backs us up on decisions like that." "What about her daughter's birthday party?" I asked, remembering how she'd mentioned needing the supplies for that. The cashier shrugged. "She'll have to shop somewhere else. That's what happens when you act like that in public. Actions have consequences." I walked out of Michael's that day with my supplies and a strange sense of satisfaction that I'd never experienced before. Not because the woman had been banned or humiliated, I'm not cruel enough to take pleasure in someone else's embarrassment. But because, for once in my life, someone who acted badly had actually faced real consequences for their actions. The chocolates turned out absolutely amazing, by the way. My coworkers went crazy for them, and our Star Wars movie night was a huge success. Amanda, my boss, pulled me aside afterward to tell me how impressed she was with my creativity and attention to detail. The Darth Vader helmet chocolates were apparently so realistic that one of the guys from the marketing department took photos to post on his Instagram. The whole evening was exactly what I'd hoped it would be: fun, memorable, and a chance for me to shine in front of my colleagues. But every time I think about that movie night now, I remember the woman who lost so much over so little. I think about how different things could have been if she'd just made one small choice differently. It's been years since that incident, but I still think about it regularly. I think about that little boy, and I wonder what lessons he learned that day. Did he learn that it's okay to take things that aren't yours if your parent tells you to? Did he learn that lying and aggression are acceptable ways to handle conflict? Or did he learn that actions have consequences, and that treating people badly will eventually catch up with you? I hope it was the latter. I hope that seeing his mother get kicked out of the store, watching her lose all those party supplies, and experiencing the embarrassment of being publicly called out for bad behavior taught him something about the importance of honesty and respect. I hope he grows up to be the kind of person who stands up for others instead of taking advantage of them. I also think about Margaret, the stranger who stood up for what was right when she could have just minded her own business and continued shopping for yarn. She didn't know me, had nothing to gain by getting involved, and could have easily avoided the whole confrontation by just walking away. But she chose to speak up because it was the right thing to do. The world needs more people like Margaret. And I think about Dylan, the young assistant manager who didn't hesitate to do his job even though it probably meant dealing with an angry customer and extra work putting back all those craft supplies. He could have just ignored what was happening or told us to work it out among ourselves. Instead, he took action to protect his customers and maintain standards in his store. But mostly, I think about how a single moment can reveal so much about a person's character. This woman was faced with a simple choice: admit she was wrong and return a quarter that didn't belong to her, or double down on a lie and escalate the situation. She chose pride over integrity, aggression over apology, and stubbornness over common decency. And in the end, that choice cost her far more than she ever could have imagined. Sometimes I wonder if she ever thinks about that day, if she ever regrets how she handled things. Does she remember the little girl who just wanted her quarter back? Does she think about the elderly woman who witnessed her behavior? Does she feel any shame about the example she set for her child? But then I remember the look in her eyes when she told her son to take my money, the casual way she lied to my face, and the smug satisfaction she showed when she thought she was getting away with it. And I realize that people like that rarely have moments of genuine self-reflection. They're usually too busy blaming others for their problems to take responsibility for their own actions. The truth is, I'm grateful for that experience now, even though it was uncomfortable and stressful at the time. Not because I enjoyed the confrontation, I definitely didn't. But because it showed me that sometimes, standing up for yourself is worth it. It taught me that there are still good people in the world who will speak up for what's right, even when it's inconvenient. And it proved that bad behavior doesn't always go unpunished. I still avoid confrontation when I can. I still believe in treating people with kindness and respect, giving others the benefit of the doubt, and trying to find peaceful solutions to problems. But I also learned that day that there's a crucial difference between being kind and being a doormat. Sometimes, you have to draw a line in the sand and refuse to let people walk all over you, even if it's just over something as small as a quarter. My grandmother Phyllis always said you catch more flies with honey than vinegar, and I still believe that's true most of the time. Kindness, patience, and understanding can resolve most conflicts and create better outcomes than aggression or hostility. But she also taught me another saying that I didn't fully understand until that day in Michael's: don't mistake kindness for weakness. That woman looked at me and saw someone she could take advantage of. She saw my polite demeanor and quiet voice and assumed I would just accept being stolen from rather than cause a scene. She thought she could lie to my face and I'd just walk away rather than challenge her. She believed she could disrespect me and face no consequences because I seemed like someone who wouldn't fight back. She was wrong on all counts. And the best part? I never had to stoop to her level to prove it. I never raised my voice, never called her names, never made any obscene gestures or threats. I just stood my ground, told the truth, and let her behavior speak for itself. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be treated badly. Not with anger or aggression, but with quiet dignity and an unwillingness to accept less than basic human respect. That quarter taught me a lesson worth far more than 25 cents. It taught me that standing up for yourself doesn't make you mean, difficult, or confrontational. It makes you strong. It makes you someone who values themselves enough to demand fair treatment. And it makes you someone who refuses to enable bad behavior by accepting it silently. I've used that lesson many times since then, though usually in much less dramatic circumstances. When a coworker tried to take credit for my project, I spoke up immediately and made sure the record was set straight. When a contractor tried to overcharge me for work on my apartment, I questioned the bill and negotiated a fair price. When a friend repeatedly canceled plans at the last minute without apology, I had an honest conversation about how that behavior affected me. None of those situations required me to be mean or aggressive. I just had to be willing to advocate for myself and refuse to accept treatment that wasn't okay. It's amazing how much more respect you get from people when they realize you won't be pushed around. Looking back now, I realize that woman in Michael's actually did me a huge favor. She showed me a side of myself I didn't know existed, the side that won't be bullied, that won't accept lies, that won't tolerate disrespect. She thought she was putting me in my place, but instead, she helped me find my voice and my spine. So in a weird way, I want to thank her. Thank you, quarter-stealing lady from Michael's. You taught me more about myself in 10 minutes than I'd learned in years of avoiding conflict. You showed me that sometimes the most important battles are fought over the smallest things, and that integrity isn't about the size of the principle, it's about having principles at all. I hope your son learned something valuable that day too. I hope he learned that his mother's behavior was wrong and that he doesn't have to repeat her mistakes. I hope he grows up to be someone who stands up for others instead of taking advantage of them. I hope he becomes the kind of person who, when he sees someone drop a quarter, picks it up and hands it back with a smile. Because that's what decent people do. That's what I learned in the chocolate aisle of Michael's, over a quarter that fell from my pocketbook. Sometimes the smallest moments teach us the biggest lessons about who we are and who we want to be. And I know exactly who I want to be, someone who stands up for what's right, even when it's hard.